This eForms Booster Workshop. So I'm Teresa Tsvetkov. I'm the Product Innovation Manager here at Therefore, and I'm joined by Wolfgang Gogg, who is our Senior Developer who oversaw the development of the eForms module.
Hello, hi.
So the format today is Q&A. We've assembled a list of frequently asked questions that we've heard from around the world in regard to eForms. So Wolfgang has some answers already prepared to those along with some demos. But throughout the workshop, please do feel free to make use of the Q&A function that you can see on the right side of your screen. If you type your questions into this chat window, we'll be pausing throughout and can answer your questions as we go. All right, so I think I'll go ahead and turn it over to Wolfgang. Just give me a moment. Okay, and we can begin.
All right. Yeah, so then welcome also from my side. As Teresa was mentioning already, my name is Wolfgang Gogg, and I was leading the development project of the new eForms feature of Therefore. As Teresa was mentioning already, this is technically a booster workshop, which means it assumes that you have already been watching or seeing a demo of the eForms functionality. So it's not covering the basics. Sorry about that. It's not covering the basics, but just taking care about some typical questions that people have when working with the eForms and trying to give some insights into some advanced topics and some magics that are happening behind the eForms. We're gonna start this all off with some basic and infrastructure questions that we got. So the first question that we usually got quite often is, the browser support. So what are the compatible browsers, and are there any recommended browsers to use with eForms? And the basic answer to that is that the eForms does support all modern browsers on the market, which includes Chrome, Firefox, Safari, and Edge. One big but is for sure that the Internet Explorer is not supported. The main reason being that the JavaScript support of the Internet Explorer is pretty bad and outdated. And there would have been some quite extensive development effort to still also support this quite old JavaScript engine that IE has. And additionally, IE is considered a product that's soon to be discontinued and probably disappears from the market quite soon. So this is why IE is officially not supported from the eForms. What happens if somebody tries to use the Internet Explorer to connect to eForms? I mean, this is just something I can quickly show in a short demo. If I have an IE open and try to connect to eForms, that's a message for the user to basically points out that there are 4 other supported browsers there. This is just a little bit of housekeeping that we know, okay, IE doesn't work for the eForms. Okay. A little bit about coming to issues and finding problems, and just the basics of working with eForms is where can I find log files. Basically, there are 2 parts to that. One is the web API log files, which is basically the backend for the form solution, and this can be found at program data there for logs. But you have to make sure that the web API logging is enabled for sure. And there's also an logging on the level of the eForms app, and this logging has to be enabled directly in the eForms app. If you go to the settings sections and click on your avatar, there is a settings area, and in the settings area you can define if you want to log to the console window of the browser or if you want to log to local storage. And if you log to local storage, this enables you to download a JSON file as log file and send it to us for further checking. Quickly showing you both options and both log files. So first we talked about the log file of the web API. So you see here that we are in C Windows program data, therefore logs. And here you have the web API log. And if you open it up, this contains quite some information about the backend code it's running and about the eForms operations in the background. So this is just a quite good source to debug the backend. If you think about issues more in the front end, you have here this avatar of the logged in user. And if you go for settings, you can here switch between console and local storage logging. So if I would enable local storage for now and press save and do some operations, I can later get back to the settings dialog and press download log here, which creates like download the JSON file. And in the end, this JSON file contains a log file that we can use to analyze issues that may have been happened in the front end. It's just not the best tool to open it up, Visual Studio here. But here are some tracks of API calls done, and so that's a quite good source also for us to find issues when you consider that the issue may have happened in the front end. So far so good. So let's go on with the next bit. It's about how can I give somebody who is not authenticated, so an anonymous or external user, access to an eForm. And basically there is a help available, which I will show you in a minute. So if you go to the help page in the therefore help area, there's quite some extensive description about all the options, how you can embed an eForm into an iframe, or how you can, have direct access links. Basically, the link is always built in a way that you have the web client path, you have the forms embed link, then you specify the forms number, and you can optionally specify allow anonymous, which basically means that this form should be made accessible without any user authentication. But you have all the different options are pretty much described here in this documentation page, which is available already online. So you can always go there and take a look at all these different, fine-tuning and tweaking options for the URL to open up an eForm. So again, just as a summary, to send a form to an authenticated user, so this requires authentication, is the web server path, then the path to the web client. And in the subdirectory forms and embed, you can specify the number of the form. The number of the form is, you can always get it from, for example, Solution Designer. Here, if you are here in the list of forms, you can see also always the form number in here. In the same way, you can also get the form number if you switch the view to the folder view. You also see the form number here. So this is also then always the number to reference. And as I said, if it's not additionally masked with allow anonymous, this requires authentication. But if you add the additional parameter allow anonymous is equals 1, this means that this form, that no authentication must be required, and that the anonymous forms user configured in the therefore web client is used to access the form and to save the document to therefore in the end. All right, getting further to some basics about designing a form. So one question that we got here is, how can I insert a logo in an eForm? So basically the way to do this is to use an HTML element and just reference a regular image tag and just embed this onto the form. In later releases of the eForms platform, we will also offer options to embed the form, the image directly onto the form without having this reference. But for now, the way to do this is to use an HTML element and having a logo hosted somewhere on a web server. To give an example for that, I go back to my demo form. I go for edit. I take the HTML element from the list of advanced controls. I put it on the top, maybe. And basically all I need to do now is to add an image tag with the URL where the logo is, and you immediately see also in the preview area that the logo pops up actually in the same second. And if I save that, the logo is on the form. And if I save the form and then go back to the mode, you see that there's logos rendered on top of the page. So as the process is for now, to get logos and images onto a form, you need to go to the form designer, use an HTML element on the form, and in the content area of the HTML element, you can actually pretty much write any HTML code you want. And in this case, it's just an IMG tag with a source pointing to the therefore logo hosted here. And that's all required to put a logo onto a form, or an image, any kind of image actually. So next question. Are there any macros available, and how do you use macros for eForms? So yes, there is support for macros, and there's again a help page where you can look up all the supported macros. And you can use such a macro in the default value of a field, and this will populate automatically but this is something which is important to notice. This will populate for authenticated users for sure. I mean, it will not populate for anonymous users. So if there's anonymous access, the macro will be ignored because it's an unknown user to us. To quickly show you the help page, if you expand this, you see this is more or less the list of macros that we currently support. But it's not set or set in stone that there will be not any more future macros that we will support. To give you an example about using a macro, I can go back to the eForms page. I think if I'm not mistaken, this is already a macro in here. You see here the macro is user email. If I cut it out, you see that also the preview already changes immediately. So if I now open the form without the macro, you see that the name field is empty. If I go back into the form, go to the name control, go for data and default value, and type in the macro, it's going to resolve to my user account email in this case. And if I now go back and open the form once more, you see that it's automatically populating my email address into this field. So basically the usage of the available macros is to use one of the supported macros as the default value for the form.
Okay, Wolfgang, we had a question about the logo.
Okay.
Kevin is asking whether the logo works also for Therefore Online.
Sure. I mean, as I said, this URL, maybe let's go back to the logo. It's anyway in here, sorry. Sorry, where was it here? I mean, this is referencing any kind of URL. I mean, the logo could be hosted anywhere. So also for Therefore Online, if you use the form in Therefore Online and you have access to a web server where you can put the logo on, not the Therefore Online web server, but something in the customer's on-premise environments or somewhere in a cloud environment, wherever it is, you can for sure reference this public URL here, and it will load the logo also in Therefore Online accordingly. So the same procedure works fine for online and for on-premise customers. Okay, Jennifer, any more for now, or Teresa, sorry.
No, not yet.
Not yet. Okay, so then let's just go on with the presentation. We obviously got a question from someone who had a little bit of issues how to make use of the radio buttons correctly. So obviously he was adding it in the wrong way, and I will quickly demonstrate what the problem was and how the fix is. Basically, radio buttons need to be added if it should be a radio button group, so only one should be selectable. They need to be added as a group in one control. So to give an example about that, let's remove that again. I could add a radio button control here and say, okay, option 1 and add another one and say option 2. And if I save that form and try it out, you will see that I can select both options, which is for sure not wanted for a radio button. So by that I was just adding different radio button groups which are actually independent of each other. If you want to correctly have a radio button which is only allowed to select one of the possible options, the correct way of doing so is to add the radio button control, and here add the options. And save it. By that, if you now go back to using the form, you will see that there's only one option that can be selected at one time. So you can never select multiple options here. So when using the radio button control, make sure that you enter or specify the different options inside one radio button control in the values area down there. This ensures that you can only have one option selected. Okay, let's go on. So for sure, always a good question is how to correctly use the table lookup control to link primary and dependent fields. You can use the dependent fields. You basically use regular text fields or date fields that you can add to the form. And then you add like the table lookup control as being the primary control to the form, and you link up the data to the different separate fields. Basically, the table lookup control, I think you probably have seen it in the demos earlier, is a control to make use of therefore user-defined data types or therefore reference tables in forms. But for sure, we'll quickly show you how to correctly set up and how such a lookup control and how it then works in the end. So let's just get back to that page and create a new form. So I'm gonna add now some fields like name, city, and then I can add this lookup control. I call it customer number. If I go for data, there's here a section there for reference table. So here I see all my reference tables that I have configured inside therefore. I can select one, in this case a test customers table. Down here I can now map a column in the table, like the name, to a control on the form. City, city, and save it. By that, actually this is all that needs to be done. If I go now for lookup test and press the 3 dots here. Okay, obviously there, I now have run into a bug. Let me just double check that. This shouldn't happen for sure. Okay, I have to double check what went wrong here, but let's go to the test I just did some minutes ago and try it out. So this is actually how it should behave in such a case. As I said, let me follow up why the new one didn't happen correctly. It should give you then a screen with the different, data inside the table, and you should be able to select one, and the whole form is correctly populated with the data. In pretty much the same way, if you just type in a customer number and wait for a little while, it automatically populates the correct customer for that number. So you can also change it, and you should get a different customer in this case. And a further option to use this control is to, for example, just start typing a name like Mark and press the three dots later on, and it would automatically drill down the list presented by the data it has. So it was restricting to Mark already here. We could still also try to use a restriction there to further drill down to one user and then select it from there.
Okay, we have a question from Jeff on what the lookup checkbox means on the table lookup configuration.
Okay, that's a very good question. Thanks for that. Let's go back to the configuration here. The lookup checkbox is actually means that by this case you can define if the system should try to find a unique hit if a value is entered into this field. So for example, I mean, if you think about having a field like, I don't know, sex, it's like female or male, it doesn't make sense to try a lookup because you probably won't find a unique hit by that in your table. If you, a lookup on city probably is also not a very good idea because you probably find a lot of hits with the same city. So it's by having this option to say, okay, you have a potential unique hit in this field, it should eliminate unnecessary server calls. So if you check lookup, for example, for the name field, it is potentially a good idea or a valid idea to check the lookup, just because you might have a unique hit if you type in a full name. If you don't have a unique hit, I mean, this is just one server round trip. Nothing happens basically, and the form stays as it is. So there's nothing going wrong by that. But as I said, by having this option to say, okay, if a value changes in this field, there is a potential unique hit. So you should look it up. By this, you can fine tune how many server calls we do and when we try to populate the other fields. I hope this was somehow understandable. So in most cases, it's that it's default off so that we don't do too many lookups. But as I said, if you have some very good unique fields where you probably have a unique hit like a number field, customer number, something like that, ticking on the lookup is for sure a good idea. Okay, this is it about the table lookup. A next question we received was, do we have an automatic counter field for eForms? And currently we do not have that, but for sure whenever you submit an eForm to the system and process it on the server side of therefore, and if you have configured an automatic counter on the therefore category, this counter will be filled for sure. So that means you can have automatic countering in a way, but only when the document is finally saved to therefore. The automatic counter value would not appear on the form on the client side. So automatic counters, yes, but only in the backend when the document is saved to therefore. What's the best practice to create a form and link it to a therefore category? Basically, I mean, for sure you set up the form in the UI, you create the form, you drag and drop your fields. But then it's also very important to understand that it helps us a lot if you enter some test data. Because by using the submission that is created by the test data, we can help you and build the UI in the solution designer to make it easier to match and map the fields to the final category. If you don't do it, you can still create the indexing profile on the server side, but it's way more difficult to do. To show you what I mean, I will do a quick example here. So let's just delete that for now and create a new form. So if I create a new form, I can add this field here. So let's just stay with that. And if I save the form now, it's saved, but there is no test data added yet. And if I now open this form in Designer to finalize everything, which I can do by pressing this button here, I select the category. If I take a look at the drop-down list, it's basically empty. I have a date, I have the JavaScript functions for now replace split, but there's no kind of any kind of help which is related to this specific form. But if I go back and now here switch to the test form mode and enter some test data here and press submit, there's two things that are actually quite helpful now. First of all, I have the option here to download a sample submission. So for me, this is quite helpful because I can take a look at the internals of the data sent to therefore, which may be very helpful finally to configure the indexing profile right. So if I press the button here, you see that there is a submission JSON downloaded. I actually want to open it with a different tool. And you see that this is the data that actually therefore finally receives. So this functionality to download the submission data, download the JSON is always quite neat and quite handy if I want to get a better picture about what data therefore is finally processing in the indexing profile. And it's also quite good because you could create different test cases for your indexing profile by using this functionality. But on the other side, if I now press Open Designer once more and do the same steps like selecting the category, you also see that here in the drop-down list, now I have the data from the sample form, which I filed to the system. And now I actually can map a field quite easily by just having a click and the profile is set up. So this test form functionality is pretty important for us to make it easy for you to create the profile on the server side finally. So it's always very much recommended that whenever you change a form or you create a form, that you always file a valid sample test data to the system so that we can help you in the indexing profile to do the mapping by presenting you these drop-down menus and data from the form. So this is actually then the best practice to create a new form. Drag and drop your fields, save the form, go to test form, file sample data, maybe download the submission for your reference, and go to the designer to finalize the configuration and make the form workable.
Okay, we had a nice question from Nestor about whether you can add some kind of CAPTCHA feature to an anonymous eForm.
I'm not sure about if I understand right the CAPTCHA feature. What is this referring to?
Like the reCAPTCHA control that we just
did. Okay. Yeah. Okay, yeah. Yes, I mean, since the update 1, which was just released last week, if I'm not mistaken, we support reCAPTCHA control, which is using reCAPTCHA version 3 from Google. Basically, this means you don't see anything because you just see it is protected by reCAPTCHA area here, because reCAPTCHA version 3 is basically an invisible control which is collecting data about the user behavior and by that guessing or giving a probability about if the user is a bot or not. So what does it help now in the end? If you add this reCAPTCHA control to the form, on the server side you get a value for this reCAPTCHA control which is between 0 and 1. For a human, the value is usually 0.9. For a bot, it's usually 0.1. what this helps is basically on the server side, while processing the indexing profile, you can still decide by checking this value in the script, for example, if you want to ignore, for example, this submission, or if you still want to have it and save it to the system. Setup-wise, if you go for a reCAPTCHA test form here, you see there's this reCAPTCHA control down there, and you can define if you want to, fire the reCAPTCHA event on form load or on button click, and basically in this API key you then get the probability value for it. I think we should even be able to see this here. So if I download the form submission, yeah, you see here what reCAPTCHA is giving you. So you had a success in checking the reCAPTCHA, you have a challenge date, and you have a score. In this case, the score is 0.9, which means I'm most probably a human. I hope this is true. And by that, now on the server side, in the scripting, I can still, do some actions depending on the score that I get. But also to be very clear about this, this uses Google reCAPTCHA, so that means you have to have a valid Google reCAPTCHA account. So here are some instructions for a customer, for example, how you can register and get this kind of account set up, and the key is required, because for this control to work, here in therefore, sorry, settings. There are two new settings, which are the reCAPTCHA secret key and the side key, and this is for sure required for this control to work, because basically the magic in reCAPTCHA, like the guessing if this is a human or a bot, is done by Google. And so yeah, but that's how we support reCAPTCHA in the forms since the update 1. So I hope this answers the reCAPTCHA question. So it's nothing that the user sees. There's nothing he has to click away, like this, like previous reCAPTCHA style with the checkbox that you had to click, which tells you if you're a bot or not. The latest version of the reCAPTCHA is completely invisible to a user, and is doing all the magic in the background. Okay, let's continue. Some advanced design topics. How to add calculations and validations to an eForm. Well, this is possible with JSON logic and JavaScript. While I feel more comfortable with JavaScript, somebody else may prefer JSON logic, but that's up to you basically. There are the tabs in the configuration for validation and data, where you can set the default data or define a validation. And there's for sure a script editor available that helps you to create the scripts. So for example, if we go to a sample form, I think it's that one here. Oh, sorry. Yeah, I know something seems to have messed up the other form. I need to check that. Sorry for that. Two things you see here. I mean, first of all, it's checking the thing I was checking before, and it's calculating the number of days down here. So there's also some automatic calculation about the days in between these two dates. And you also see now that the submission is working. So obviously something was wrong with the other form. To quickly show you what's behind that. First of all, if you check this field, you have this validation area, and if you expand custom validation, you see that we're actually reading the two values, like day of leave and day of return, and we're calculating them, and we're checking if the second date is after the first date. That's basically all, which in the end sets if it's valid or not. That's a quite easy sample to just compare two values and define if this is okay or not okay. Additionally, you can specify here the error message we just saw before, and when it's validated. Quite similar, it's about the number of requested days. So if we go here for data, there is this area calculated value. And again, here you see that we are just reading out from data these two values, and we are trying to calculate the difference and round it to a day, which means we are actually calculating how many days are in between these two dates. But these are the main areas where you can apply your custom JavaScript code. And for sure, I mean, you can also use it for a custom default value. There are many places where some custom calculations can be added by using JavaScript. So calculating values and also validating user input. Some very important question, which basically comes immediately after the information where to put something, is how could I debug my script? Because sometimes you will have to find issues, or your script doesn't work as you want. Like just in the case before, I switched the form, so I will have to debug afterwards. Basically, there is a very good command to be used here, which is just called debugger. And basically what this command does is actually stops the execution of the script code as soon as you have the developer console open, and let you debug this specific area of code immediately. This is very neat and very handy when you play around with the control there. So to give you a sample of that, if we go back to the other form, which may give me anyway a hint on immediately. So we go, for example, this validation script. Sorry, we wanted to get here. Here's my script, and I add here the statement debugger. This basically means that the script execution will stop here and let me debug all the rest of the code as soon as they use the developer console. So to showcase this, I will save the form. I will go back into vacation request form. Now I'm getting the debugger open here. And now you see whenever I change something, I immediately get into the function that I have here. It's stopping at the debugger. And now I'm able to check all the different objects from the data and access all properties, debug any type of code. So I absolutely can now step-by-step run over the code and debug whatever I've been doing in there. So that's a very, very good statement if you run across issues and your statements don't work as you expect them to work. It's perfectly to have this debugger just hold execution and let you debug what's going wrong. And in the same way, if you close the console and you change something, nothing happens, it's just ignored. So it doesn't block execution in a regular way. It only stops if you have the developer console open and do a change. Then you can debug your code. So this is a very good thing to know, and this is very good to debug issues. Yeah.
Okay, we had a question on whether you can mask an input field. For example, if you want to mask somebody's social security number.
By mask you mean hide it, like when he enters it?
Yeah, I believe so. Well, yeah, you can show that control.
Let me check. To be honest, I'm not 100% sure about that. But we can. Let me just finish one thing first, and then I will come back to the masking. Just because we are covering this topic just now. I'm closing that now. Another option for debugging, which is equally good in many cases, is to not use the debugger command, but use console log. inside the script. You could, log any kind of content of variables and data in here. And if I save that one now and go back to the form execution and have the console running, here it is now. You see here test output, so it's logged to the console, so you can always put some stuff in here and then look what's logged here and output it by that. So that's also a good way to debug some internal code if you don't want to use the debugger directly, but just output some text or some variable values. It's console log is also a very good option for that. So just to get back to this once more. So console log is always a very, very good thing to know about. I'm removing this now again. Okay, and now about the masked input. I mean, let me just quickly check if we can easily put the mask on top of that. That's something I'm not 100% sure about. I think that's it, okay. And to be honest, I never tried that. Yeah, so you can mask it away. The user types it in, you get the data on the Delphi server side, but it's not visible in the UI. So very similar to a password control. So getting back to it, here, hide input is obviously the check you need to do. So one more, how do I create a table for line items and calculations? We have basically two different controls to use for table creation. I will just quickly show you afterwards both of them. We have a data grid and an edit grid. Calculations are for sure possible for both control types. When you're inside a table, you always do calculations using the row property. Outside the table we saw that we usually use the data property, which is the data of the whole form. But inside a row, and if you want to only have this calculation done in the context of the current row, there is a row property you can use, like in the sample here. You can calculate the value by row quantity multiplied with the row unit price, for example. But for sure, also from outside the table, it's possible to get access to all rows and, for example, calculate the total sum of entries in the table. I mean, it's, I think, way easier to run through this in real life. So let's just switch to the demo again, to the accounting and purchase orders sample. Here, for example, we have this edit grid, which means if I press the add another button, I kind of get the subform displayed where I can now enter my or reference my products. So like I can select the product here, I can specify quantity, it's calculating the total price, and if I press save, it's added to the table in a more condensed, summarized way. So this is quite a neat and good control if you have quite some data to enter and you have a lot of columns, because it doesn't require so much space on the screen. Let's do one more. Let's do another product. Again, line price is calculated, and if I press save, you also will notice here's a total value. So also this total value field is updated immediately. Let's do one more. And for sure, if you want to allow that, you can always also allow like changing lookup values. So like if you have a discount, for example, for a specific customer, you can always change that here, and it will also immediately be reflected correctly. And when it's pressed save, total value is updated, and you have your table up here. And if you go, for example, to edit one row, it's expanding again. You can change a value here, and you can save it back. And all data on the form is updated immediately by that. So this is the edit grid. Maybe we just quickly show a little bit more details about that. That's basically how this edit grid control looks like. Inside you have your controls laid up, and if I go for the, that's not a panel. And that's the edit grid component where you have your templates, how you render that, and your API key. But basically, it does automatically, the number of fields you add here, it automatically adds that to the condensed tabular view. The other control for tables that I will quickly show is the data grid. This component is a little bit different because the data grid doesn't have such a condensed view. So if you add fields to the data grid, adds a column anytime you add a field to it, which makes it a little bit more space consuming on screen. So if you go, for example, for the test here, you see that there are real controls rendered here inside the table directly. With add another, you can add new lines, as many as you want, and you can immediately edit in and work inside the control. So that's more or less doing the same thing. So it's a table that you can have an unlimited number of rows for, but it's a little bit more, usually eating up a little bit more space. But in the end, it's equally good, and you can do very nice things with that. There is one more thing to mention about data grid, which is also quite nice sometimes. You can also add a data grid in combination with a panel, which gives you the advantage that you can really have a nice layout inside this data grid. So you can now add a panel to it. And inside the panel, you can now add your text fields. What this does is just if you say add another, it's adding actually a full kind of set of fields in one go, and you can also delete a full set of these fields in one step. So you can actually kind of lay out a subform here and use that. I think we have a pretty nice demo for that. If we go for travel insurance, here you have such a panel at the beginning about the persons that you want to have the insurance for, and if you press add another, it's adding like another person in this UI, and you can add a second person to that. So that's also a pretty nice and quite useful combination to combine the edit grid with the panel to make a nice tabular UI like this one here. One more thing I wanted to show is just quickly how the calculation of the total value is done, or basically how the calculations are done. So here in total price, for example, if I take a look at the data and calculated value area, you basically see the script that I was just referencing in the presentation before. It's saying the value is the row quantity multiplied with the unit price. And important is actually to differentiate between the row property and the data property. It's actually explained up here too. So row property is always the contextual row level data. So if you're inside a row, you should always use the scripting with that component. And the data is the complete submission data object. So this is actually accessible, like giving you all the objects on the whole form and not just the objects in this one row. And for the total value, there's also a calculation done. It's using the reduced JavaScript function basically, which means actually it's summing up all total price values. And that's basically it. So that function looks a little bit more complicated, but basically it's just very easy to do, and it can be like used exactly like this in many use cases. In the end, this just means sum up one column, in this case the total price column, and put the results into this kind of control. Okay, Teresa, questions or just continue?
No, there was just some questions about whether they could have a copy of the configurations for the sample forms and also recording for the webinar. And of course, we can make these configurations available on the extranet, and this is being recorded, so you can watch it also later.
Okay, good. Then let's hop on to the next question. Page breaks. So yes, I mean the form is rendered as a PDF to therefore, and in some places it's very important that you are in control where the page break happens. And this is basically done by using a custom CSS class in the form. And at the point where you want to have the page break happening, you can use this custom class page break here, which will immediately introduce a page break at this control in the resulting PDF. For sure, again, it's nicer to have a sample. So let me just switch again to my development environment, and I will just try to give you a good sample of that. Here we got a little contact request form, and if I just fill this out with some data, I mean any data, so, and submit it. And if I go then back into my environment and look at it here, you currently see this is one big form. I mean, there's no page break or anything, it's just one form. If I now go back and, for example, go to to edit form, go to role and company, and just enter the custom CSS class in here. There's this custom CSS class field. I can put this page break here marker into this class and save it. And now, if I fill out the form once more, it should introduce actually a page break exactly at this spot. So let's check if this really worked. And you see now you got the form on page 1 until company name, and the rest of the form is rendered on page 2. So by using this custom CSS tag on the form definition, you are actually in full control about the place when a page break is going to happen. So when you know that this control is probably spread just across a page break, you can introduce this class and it will render correctly and make sure that the form is then saved as a PDF in a nice, good readable way. Okay.
So we have a question from Andrew. He's asking if you can use the JavaScript area to make external web API calls.
Basically, the JavaScript area is not restricted, so you could make external calls, but for sure you always have to keep the performance a little bit in mind, especially as validation scripts are quite commonly called. But you can for sure validate, like change it a little bit when it's validated. So all I want to say is that if the call is a web service call which is potentially slow, you have to be very careful about using it in the right place or caching data, or even make sure that it's only executed in the right moment in time. But in theory, you can use this HTTP request object there. It's available, and you can for sure also make external web service calls in the JavaScript. Okay. Then let's get back to the presentation quickly. So can I change the layout, the format, anything about the PDF creation? And yes, you can, but basically at the moment this is restricted for the on-premise customer, because for this you need to have access to the code that is actually creating the PDF. Basically, the PDF creation is happening in the install directory of therefore in a subdirectory called form convert, and there is a HTML file which is called form convert. And in here, actually, the logic is to render and create the PDF from the form data. So if we take a look at that here in the structure. So this is actually how it looks. And here there is, for example, a style area. In here you could introduce or change any styles you want. You can add custom CSS classes, like for example the page break class that is defined here. So that's actually also where this page break here, CSS, is defined. And you can introduce any other like CSS tricks, hacks, style changes in here. And by this you can change the PDF to a layout that you want. But as said, this is only possible for on-premise customers. This does not yet work on the online system. But for sure we have also in the back of our minds some possibilities for the online system to maybe fine-tune and change this. But as it is per today, you can do modifications to the PDF creation, but only for on-premise customers. So next question, how do eForms integrate with workflows? Basically, eForms don't have a direct workflow integration, so that means also eForms don't have an own workflow engine. But for sure, as soon as a document is submitted to therefore, like, converted to PDF and saved to the system and the category, you have all the workflow options of therefore available in the background. So this can for sure trigger a workflow process, and by using the workflow engine of therefore, then you can, send out notification emails, create PDF documents from it. So that's pretty open to further processing. But the form itself doesn't have a workflow engine, so the form itself doesn't run through different workflow steps or so. What is an already planned enhancement for later releases is that the workflow engine of therefore should be able to prepare a submission for a user. That means it should be able to pre-fill some data and then send just a completion link to a user, which the user can then open and just, finalize the submission by maybe just adding 1 or 2 more data fields to it. That's something which is planned. And I think this should be happening until the next full release of therefore. This feature should be implemented. Can an eForm be routed to multiple people for completion? This is a pretty related question somehow. But as said, as the eForms don't have a separate and own workflow engine, there's no routing possible for the form itself. But already for the next upcoming release, we plan to have the capability to save drafts to the system, which means that one user can create a draft, like partly filling out a form. And when you save a draft, you actually get a link to the draft, an access link. And if you would send this access link to somebody else by email, for example, this person could finalize and file a draft in the end. So as said, there's no automatic workflow and routing planned, but by using this draft feature, it will be possible to save a half filled out form to somebody else to finalize.
Okay, and then Glenn had a question about using an existing PDF form and dropping a signature on that, if that's possible.
Yeah, currently it's not. I had a one-on-one with Jeff already previously, who was asking me the same question. Currently we don't have access to the signature data for further processing, but for sure this is something that we can consider for later developments. And I would also ask you to really file this maybe to the ideas portal so that we can really collect the votes for that feature. But as it is per today, this is not possible. We save the signature data for sure to the system, but for now we don't have any access in the workflow or in the create PDF area to use the signature and push it onto a PDF, for example. This is currently not possible.
And then Rick is asking for a little more clarification on what you mean by a separate, eForms doesn't have a separate workflow.
Well, therefore has a workflow engine on its own, like integrated into the core product. And I know there are some products out there which have like a workflow engine for the eForms and a workflow engine for the core product and the documents. And for us, actually, it's a strategy to only have one workflow engine. That means there is no separate workflow routing configurable for the eForm as a standalone component. So to make use of workflow functionality, it means the workflow triggers in whenever a document is submitted or saved to therefore, then the regular therefore document workflow can be used. I hope this clarified it. Otherwise, please just drop another note and I will still try to clarify more. If there are currently no more questions, I can just quickly update you on the changes that have been coming with the update 1. I mean, one change was already covered with a reCAPTCHA control that we discussed quickly. But another change is also that we added geolocation controls. So as you see here now, there's an integration into Google Maps. And this can be used in multiple ways. I mean, first of all, for sure, you can geolocate yourself, either automatically when you load the form immediately, or you can press this little icon here, and it will bring you and geolocate you back to the location where you currently are by the information on your device, on your browser, on your phone. For sure, you can also, drag and drop this kind of marker to another place and get the address from it down here. You for sure also can type in an address and go there. You can use the satellite mask, for example, to show that here. You can use Street View. You can use it full screen. So there's quite some extensive features there for the location control. And if it's not about that you need to see a map on screen, there's this address control, which was also added, which is just helping you to find an address, like by typing in, starting to type, and giving you some offers, some possibilities what you may want to enter there, and then giving the address of it. So these two geolocation controls have been added to the product in update 1. Again, something to mention here for the usage of these geolocation controls is if you go for the configuration, you see that this requires API keys. And these keys have to be provided by the customer. So as this integrates with Google Maps, the customer needs to have a valid Google Map API key, or needs to create a valid Google Maps API key for this control to work. I mean, this is a one-time thing, and it's provided by the customer once in the configuration, not per user. But we need to rely on the customer's API keys here, because we cannot provide therefore own API keys to a customer to make this control workable. This is just a note here about this map control. It's the same for the address control. Also, the address control needs to have the same API keys available. Yeah, this is mainly like the update, the changes for update 1. I mean, there is for sure some minor changes like this copy form functionality. So you can now make a copy of a form from here if you want to have multiple forms derived from the same base form, for example. So there's quite some minor changes and enhancements. But actually the new controls like the reCAPTCHA, the address and the location control are for sure the big new features in this update 1 of the forms. Okay, well, that's pretty much the prepared content from the questions we received up front. So if there are more questions, I'm happy to continue answering them. So maybe Teresa, something on the chat window?
One question popped up about whether the forms can be taken offline.
Currently not. I mean, offline in a way that the forms can be used in an intranet without live internet connection to the outside, because this was something which was not possible in the update 0 first release. For the update 0 release, you had to have a valid internet connection on the client, otherwise the form solution didn't work. Now in update 1, it's actually possible to use the forms in the intranet without any external connection to the internet, but it doesn't mean that you can use the forms offline. This is a feature that is still under development and considerations. I mean, this is quite some big effort to build, and this is nothing which will be happen very soon, but for sure we have it in our minds to support offline forms too.
And just one comment I want to make. This is an area where we're under active development, so I hope you all know about the ideas portal. We're keeping a close eye on the ideas in there, and if you go to therefore.ideas.io, you can see under the eForms category we already have several ideas that are in development.
Maybe Teresa, you want to show the ideas portal for that?
Yeah, I can take over presentation. Here, just a second. Let me take back presenter rights and show my screen. So we have the ideas portal here. I have it filtered for eForms. So some of the top ideas that have been submitted are pre-populating the forms with a URL parameters, for instance. That's in development. The ability to save a draft of an eForm submission is also in development. Offline forms is one that's already been submitted, and there's several more. So please do take a moment to visit there and vote for the ideas that are important to you, and also submit ones if they're not already in there. Yep.
Okay, and just one more thing to show you is actually how easily or nice you can embed such a eForm onto a customer like portal page, for example, or even on the extranet of a customer. I have a quick sample here, and if I fire it up, you'll actually see that that's actually a regular HTML page, and the contact request is coming directly from therefore. And if you press submit, it's actually also filing the document to therefore. It appears to be naturally a part of the web page, but it's actually rendered from inside therefore. So how is this done? I'm quickly showing you how easy this actually is, basically. That's just the page that contains it. And all required to achieve something like this is actually this one line here. Because this embeds a new iframe onto the page, it references the form, in this case 46, and it allows anonymous usage, so there's no login or something happening. And that's pretty much it. This will render the form from the therefore server directly onto the customer page, allow anonymous access, and whenever somebody fills out the form, it will have the regular processing as we know from the forms portal. So like it will send the document as PDF to the therefore category, where it could trigger off a workflow, send notifications to people that require that, all the stuff that is then happening in the therefore system itself. So it's basically just one line of HTML code to embed such a form onto a customer portal page, for example, and make it accessible from there. Quite easy to show. It's also like how dynamically it can be like done, because if you go here, for example, and we enter the form number, you see that the form is immediately rendered down there. And if you change it to, I don't know, I hope I have a form like that. No, let me check which I have a valid form. 106, let's try that one here. So you see it's very dynamically and easily just to render a form wherever you want in an iframe.
Okay, so we had another question about putting the forms in Therefore Go, which is now available with the latest release of Therefore Go. I think it was last week they released it, so they are supported on Therefore Go. And then Michael has a question about, can a completed form with the signature be printed so the customer can, for instance, get a copy of that form?
Well, I mean, as said, the form is saved to therefore as a PDF file. And I mean, for sure, you can print the PDF file and send it out, or you can even send out the PDF as an email to the customer as a reference for whatever he has filed. If this is what you refer to, I mean, there's no automatic printout happening somewhere from just the form submission, but basically what we get and what is saved in therefore is a printable PDF document, and for sure you can anywhere, and therefore you can start the printing of it.
Okay, and then Rick wanted to review real quickly what you mentioned couldn't be covered and therefore online, I think with the CSS.
Yeah, I mean, for sure, naturally what's more difficult and therefore online is changing backend stuff. And this basically mainly refers to how the PDF is created in this case. So I said that here's this form convert area, which is installed with therefore, and this form convert HTML file, which contains some CSS style logic, so some style information. And if you want to customize that, so completely use different styles or completely different fonts or whatever, you can do this, you can customize it, but only for on-premise customers, because only for on-premise customers you have access to this file to change it. For online customers, it requires a completely different approach to customize the appearance, and this is something that will take us more time to develop and offer to customers.
Okay, it looks like the questions have stopped coming in. So please do, everyone feel free to reach out to us after the session. We're always happy to answer any further additional questions. We got one, hold on. In the eForm indexing profile, how is the signature sent to a therefore category?
The signature is actually not, well, basically the signature, technically it is an base64 PNG file in the submission, but we don't treat this differently. So this is basically just saved with the data. So you could extract it, but what you would get from it, I mean, I can easily show it to you, what you could get from it doesn't really help you too much in terms of index data. So let's just try if there's a good form I can showcase this with. Yeah, let's just try this one. No, sorry. So go to test mode, submit, and get the submission. So now we can take a look what's in there actually. And here you see the signature is actually such like base64 encoded, file. It's basically a PNG file rendered as text. So we basically don't do anything with it. We render it in the PDF file and we keep it in the submission data. So it's something we can reference later on. And I mean, you could map, all this data. You could take the string and map it to an index data field, but it most probably won't help you too much to process it later on. But basically, for sure, this data is accessible. I mean, if you have the indexing profile, you can access this data from the indexing profile and do with it whatever you want to do with it, in theory. But that's what you get from the forms portal. This is how a signature looks like if it's saved to the system.
Okay, great. Then I think we can wrap it up for today. And yeah, like I said, reach out if you have further questions. We will have a recording of this workshop available on our extranet, and we can make the configurations for some of these forms available as well. All right, so thank you all and have a great day.